Hey, good evening, everyone. Just gonna quickly put out a tweet saying that I've gone live. And just put it into Discord. Right, okay, so let's quit that out, close it down. Okay, so basically, I've got about an hour and a half to kill, so I thought I'd jump online and do a quick walkthrough of building an add-on in Statamic. Sort of a follow-up to the one that I was doing the other day, but I had to cut short. So basically, what we're going to look at doing is just building a really simple tag add-on. Mainly because it's 9 times out of 10 going to be the one that you're using. So I think it kind of really helps to have a sort of a real world example of how that works. Just in case you're wondering how it works, so obviously one of the great things about Statamic is that you don't need to know PHP to build a website with Statamic. Obviously, it helps, and it helps to have an underlying, an underlying understanding. That's a mouthful. An underlying understanding of things like loops, things like arrays, things like data structures, that type of thing. But it's not necessary. So while that's the case with building websites for Statamic, if you want to build an add-on, yeah, you got to know PHP. There's not really any way around that. Obviously, as I said, other things that you need to kind of know are object-oriented PHP, namespacing, and it probably helps to know Laravel. I mean, it's not needed, but a lot of the patterns that are used in plugins or add-ons for Statamic are based on Laravel patterns. So although it's not necessary, it will help you get up to speed a lot quicker. So as I was saying the other day, there are a couple of parts to an add-on. We're not going to focus on this bit, at least for the beginning of this. We're just going to focus on that bit while we do a couple of things. So let's create the add-on. So I'm not going to use the CLI just because sometimes it can be really useful to walk you through exactly how it works. Now, add-ons live within the site's add-ons folder, and as is always best practice, kind of. I mean, you might get some arguments otherwise, but for me, sort of best practice is to always create a meta file first. So let's just call this add-on hello. And so we'll create a meta.yaml file, and we're going to set its name to hello. It's version 2.0.1. Description: a simple demo add-on for Statamic. Developer is me, and commercial is false. Commercial. You wouldn't believe the amount of times I misspoke commercial, and then wonder why I can't see the field. So what we're going to do is we're just going to make sure we're in this, and yep, sure enough, we can see that we've got name, version, developer, and description. So it just correlates to those. Okay, right. So next, let's just close that. When we want to build an add-on that uses a tag, the rules of building Statamic add-ons so that they are auto-loaded, and I won't go into the details, but basically Statamic uses PSR for auto-loading to basically make sure that when you have an add-on that is named appropriately, it will automatically be turned on. So it's not like WordPress where you have to drop it into the plugins folder and then log in and then activate the plugin. Provided it follows the correct naming structure, it will just be turned on automatically. So because our add-on is called hello, it needs to be hello and then whatever the API that you're using, which in our case is tags. So we now have that. Now, as it stands, it does nothing because it doesn't have some very key components. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to add our namespace. So within Statamic, all add-ons use the same lead. The first two parts of the namespace are always the same: Statamic and add-ons. Quite easy to remember, to be honest. The third one is the name of the add-on that you're creating. So in our case, it's hello. If the add-on's name was Google Analytics, it would be that. If it was Pardot Connector, it'd be that. But like I said, for the time being, this add-on is called hello, so it's just hello. The next thing to do, I'll skip a quick step and then come back to that, is we need to create our class. As I said, all add-ons in Statamic are use object-oriented PHP, so they're all class-based. The name of the class is always the name of the add-on plus tags, or whatever the API. So if it was a modifier, we'd go modifiers. It's always plural as well. But in this case, we're using tags. And you could literally do that, but that won't do anything because we are using the API. We need to extend the class, so it extends tags. Because I'm using VS Code, obviously I've got access to helpers. If you're using things like PHP Storm, you'll get exactly the same. If you're using things like Atom, I think there are some plugins for that enable similar functionality. So if I hit enter, you'll see that we get this: use Statamic extend tags. And that's just a way of extending that API so that we can actually access all of its methods. Now, this class at the moment does nothing. If we want it to do something, then we need to start adding some methods. And depending on your use case, you might decide to allow the tag to be used by itself, just as a name. And if that's the case, then you want to call it public function index, not its name. And again, this as it stands won't do anything. If we were to go, let's open up the home template. We're just using Redwood, and I had previously created a partial called hello because it's easier to separate it out. So I'll just show you hello will render hello here. If I go back here and I'll change that for hello, you'll get the sound of silence because there's nothing to be output. So what's happening here? Well, we're not returning anything. And you kind of have to return something for something to appear. So you could literally return hello. And sure enough, by returning hello, we get that. You could literally go, my name is Andrew Price. And sure enough, you get that. That is a very, very simple demo of how simple a tag add-on can be. Let's say we want to get a little bit more complicated. Let's say we want to give an additional function to this. Okay, so let's say function, and we're going to say, let's call it name. Okay, so we've got a public function with a name, public function called name, and let's see if we return hello, my name is, And we're going to leave it blank at the end for the time being, because what I want to show you is what happens and how you can pass in data. But actually, let's, for the time being, let's just pass through my name is Ben. And if I go into this, let's just save this and show you that even though I've added that new thing, it's still the same. And let's just add a break, and another break. And then we're going to go hello. And as you've probably noticed, just from using like tags yourself within Statamic, the name and the method are separated by a colon. So in this case, it would be hello Ben. And if I refresh the page, you will see that apparently, yes, of course, actually, yeah, sorry, the method is hello name, not hello Ben. There you go. You can see, hello, my name is Ben. So that is pretty much a good example of how you can use this type of stuff, and how the base tag and a tag with a method differs. So let's start doing a little bit more with this now. And a really good example is if we start looking at this. So src equals foo. Okay, so src and foo are quite abstract examples. You know, they work well for people who are experienced and they can kind of say, okay, right, I understand what that means. But for somebody who's just starting out or somebody who's getting to grips, that can be quite difficult. So let's use a little bit more of a concrete example. So we're going to say hello, name, let's say is. You know, if you called the function something else, it could be hello, welcome, or whatever. You know, you could pass through that as name. I tend to try and make parameters make a little bit more sense than that. So is quite a good one. Ben, okay, so let's just go back here and let's get rid of Ben from that, and we'll go back to the home page and refresh, and we should be able to see hello, my name is blank. Let's just get rid of that for the time being, just to make things a little bit easier. So we can see here, hello, my name is, and it's still got that space at the end. So what we want to do now is we want to be able to grab that parameter. So in order to grab a parameter, there is a method within the tags, or in fact, actually, I think it's within much lower down. I'm not entirely sure what class it is, but it's a class that we have access, or a method we have access to. So we're just going to call it name, because it is will always be referring to name in this instance. So this get param, and we want to say is. So get param in this instance is how we access any parameter on a tag, and that's the same with a lot of other tags that you will see and use within Statamic. Things like nav. You know, if you're talking about the nav tag, there will be a get parameter from or max depth within the actual code base, and that's effectively how Statamic grabs information from handlers and passes it into the relevant method. So we have name, this get param is, and let's just, before we return it, let's just say dump name, and let's just make sure that it is returning it, and as we can see here, it is returning what we're expecting it to do. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to uncomment that, and we'll concatenate this and return that, and what we should see is here, my name is Ben. So as you can see, it's quite easy to return data. Now let's say we want to do something a little bit more complicated. Let's say we want to do a little bit of math. I know it's Saturday evening. it's a bit late for math, but let's this as a sort of an example. Just do a really quick one. So public function math. In fact, let's just say sum, so we don't go confusing ourselves. And we will have x equals this get param, and it'll be called x, and let's just change that to y. Good old mathematics. Names always confusing, but anyway, we will return x plus y. Now let's get this, and for the time being, let's just get rid of that, and we'll go hello, because the name of, even though it's a math thing, it's still hello sum, just because that's how it's accessed. So we're going to say x equals 1 and y equals 2. So we should get 3. It's Saturday evening. Anything can happen. This might not work. But, yep, there we go. We get 3. So, again, you can kind of do logic within these. You might say that if you're doing math, for example, that you absolutely want to make sure that it is an integer that you're receiving. So bear in mind, if you're not sure about data types, I mean, you should be relatively familiar with that, whether you're, a front-end developer because of working with the data types in JavaScript, or as a WordPress developer, because at the end of the day, you should have come across that anyway. So there is a way of doing this, and if we just quickly check the documents, we can say here that we can get an int. So these are super methods that will retrieve values from the parameter or config if none was found. So that's not what we want. We want this. So we want to get the parameter int. What this will do is we can basically pass that through, and what that means is it will ensure that we get an integer. Can we actually peek the definition? Yes, we can. Right, so this is the same as get param, but treats it as an integer. So what happens, as you can see here, is that it returns whatever this get param is as the keys in the default, but it casts it as an int. So if you pass through data that isn't a number, you're going to have a bad day. But if you cast through a number, it means that you can just be absolutely 100% sure that PHP is not going to return you a string of 1. It's going to return you an integer of 1, or it's going to return you an integer of 10 or 1,000,000 rather than a string. And that just gives you the confidence that at runtime, it's going to work rather than breaking. So let's have a think about this. What else can we do? Yeah, that's actually a good one. Let's have a think about config. Okay, so let's say we get rid of all these and we want to get something from the config. So let's just go public function index and public function, actually no, we'll leave that out for a second. We want to, when we get the default tag, and I'm just going to add a comment here just to make it a little bit easier, the hello tag, we are going to return hello, my name is, and it will be name. So let's say we want to have a fallback. Okay, so there's a way of doing this within the default, so we can pass with default, which would be something like Name is this, get param name or is or John. And so in this instance, what's happening is that we're saying get the parameter is, and if is doesn't exist or it's empty, return John. So if we go to hello and we just get rid of this and we go hello, in theory it's either going to work or it's going to break. What's it going to do? Yep, it works. So we can see now it's returning John. If we change this to, I don't know, Luke, it'll change it to Luke. If we change it to Jack, it'll change it to Jack. So, you can pass through whatever you want as a default. Now, sometimes you might not want to pass through an absolute default. Sometimes you might want it to fall back to something. And in that instance, what we might do is, let's have a look. If we go into add-ons and we just refresh this page, we click on hello, you can see that nothing happens. We just highlight the name. And that's because we haven't set up any settings for the add-on. If we want to add settings to the add-on, we can just create a settings.yaml, and within this, sometimes I forget, which is why it's always good to go back to the docs. As we can see, we've got add-on structure settings, and that's the one, fields. So we've got fields, and we're going to call it name, and it is a type of text. Now, if you've done any work with YAML fields, you might think, but why am I not adding it as display? If I can spell it. Name. Well, you can do that, but so just to make a quick note, we've added a settings page, so we can now actually click into this and it'll actually show us. We can, you can call it whatever you want to do. Let's call it Twitter, for example. Leave page. I'll change it to Twitter. But to be honest, the reason why you shouldn't do that is if you ever need to localize your add-on, it makes it an absolute nightmare to override. So the general rule of thumb is that you would create a resources lang en. Is it en? No. Let me double check that. Settings.php. Right. En settings.php, and then we would say turn. So we actually set up a PHP tag first, and then we would turn an array with the name as name. And if you ever want to add a description, you'd literally just say whatever the key is. So you can see in settings that we've used name. So we have within settings name here, name, and then if we want to have anything else, it's name struct. Yep. And we can say this is a fallback name for the hello add-on. If the user does not pass through a name, this is what will be used instead. And we can just save that. I think that's why it was. Is that why it was complaining? It was complaining. Why is that? Oh, I see. Sorry, it's me being silly and not formatting that correctly. Okay, cool. So if we go here and we refresh this, we should now see name and an instruction. In theory, we should see an instruction. What is going on there? Script. Because I wasn't passing that through in the arrow. Undefined variable name. What's going on here? Field's name. Let's call it default name, just to make sure that we're not running into any conflicts with that. No, undefined variable. Settings, second YAML. Settings.php, return default name. Foo. What is going on here? So we are returning hello resources lang. Resources lang and settings. Okay, let's just comment that out for a second to see if we can try and figure out what's going on. Right, I'm not entirely sure what's going on with that, so what we're going to do is we're just going to quietly ignore that and just comment it all out for the time being, and we'll carry on. Let's just get rid of that for the time being. Okay, so we have got name. Okay, cool. So we've got name now. I will try and figure out what was going on there, but it's a little bit too late to be doing that. So we've now got our name. If we provide the array key, thanks dog, that will be it. Right, quickly do that. Resources lang en settings.php. Check about that. That's it. Okay, we've got name and we've got fallback name. Right, before we try and be clever, let's just make sure that's actually working. Let's leave that page. Yep, there we go. Thanks, Doug. So, always good to have a second set of eyes on this. So, let's quickly say thank you for the spot. Right, so basically let's go back to this and let's just say in Doug's honor we'll put the fallback as Doug. Now if we come into here and we go here, what we can do is we can set a variable of fallback. Say this, and in the same way that we've got get param, there's also a method called get config. So this will basically go into any settings and have a look at is there a matching variable, and if there is, then grab that. So this get config, and we're going to say name. And what we'll do is we'll set this to fallback. So if there's no name defined, then it will fall back to whatever is defined in config. So in theory, it should come back as hello, my name is Doug. Yep, there we go. So that is how you can start introducing a lot of sort of usability into add-ons. A really good example of that would be if you wanted to build a Google Analytics add-on, and you want to output everything, you could have a setting or a field in your config where people can put their Google Analytics ID or their GTM ID in, and be able to pull that through into the front end without them necessarily having to hard code it. It's unlikely that would ever change, but you never know. And realistically, I mean, that's what a lot of there is to do with tags. Just quickly double check if there's anything else to do with tags. There's tag pairs, but to be honest, that's probably a topic for another night. Tag pairs are a little bit different from regular tags. I wonder. Yeah, you know what? Let's give it a go. So let's say we have. Let's use the example from here. So let's say we have this. Okay. Just have a think about how to structure that public function. What is it called? Let's say array. Right. And we'll return this. So an example when you might get this type of thing is if you were calling an API and you got an array back, in particular an associative array. So let's say you're calling that, and let's just call it, I don't know, let's say you had a sort of a nature API or something that you wanted to sort of have for people who are going out hiking or something like that, and they wanted to know different facts around the area that they were particularly going to. You might have a tag that you want to output onto the page. So let's have a quick look. And this kind of works really well with this Redwood default theme, in the sense that, let's say Niles wanted to write a little bit about some of the trails that he manages. He might want to output, sort of information for people who are looking at visiting those parks. So let's say he had this and he wants to say, he wants to output various information. Let's go to hello, and what we'll do is we're going to say it'll be hello nature, and we'll close that tag pair. So again, in the same way as before, you've got the tag name and you've got the method name. The only difference this time is because we're using tag pairs, you need to have it as an opening and closing tag. And then you can literally do something like, I think one of them was tree, was it? Yeah, tree. So when we output this, what we should see is maple. Yep, so we got maple. So an example here would be, you might say, the most common tree on this route is the tree. The path is predominantly path, and if you look up the color of the sky, it's in America, so we won't be using the British spelling. The color of the sky will typically be sky. I think it's sky. Was it sky? Or was it sky? Yes, it was. So if we now go here and we output that, we should see the most common tree on this route is the maple. The path is predominantly dirt, and if you look up, the colour of the sky will typically be blue. So that's like a really simple example. You know, you might have it more where you know, really a good example of this would be a weather API that you might use to call through, you know, sort of temperature, whether or not it's likely to, well, temperature, what the type of conditions it is, whether it's going to rain, whether it's going to be sunny, whether it's going to be cloudy. And you might also pull through things like what the temperature is, also what the scale is. So is it Celsius, is it Fahrenheit, is it Kelvin? I don't know anybody who uses Kelvin for those type of things, but hey, that's what the weather APIs offer. Um, you know, it could be finance related. So if you wanted to show information about shares and you were returning an associative API or array from the API of share price, share code, the index that it's on, etc., etc. That's one way of doing it. There is also the ability to parse content. So the easiest way of explaining this is, whereas we've got associative things there, an associative array, where we can say we want the value of tree or we want the value of path. Let's say we wanted to get maple, dirt, and blue in one go, and we wanted to loop through it. What we could do is use the parse method. So, let's have a look. So, where this would differ, and what I'll do is I'll set this up as public function, and we'll call it parse just to make it clear what's going on. And instead of returning the array, what we will do is we will call this nature. And then we will return this parse nature, no, not name, nature. And then what we will do is we will come here and we can come down here and go hello parse, hello parse. And instead of naming it things like tree this time, what we can do is we can say, let's go UL, let's create an unordered list, LI, and then we can literally just say value, and in theory, unless it's going to blow up, we should get, no, should be comparable with, that is because I've returned the wrong data structure. What is that kind of, that's returning as an object, isn't it? Okay, declaration of parse should be compatible with. Oh, no, I see what I've done wrong. Because I've called it example parse, and parse must be an existing method, or parse is an existing method, that's why. Call it example. So the data wasn't wrong, but yeah, that wasn't the best thing, and we're not outputting it. So the question is, why? Where are we going wrong on this? This method accepts an associative array and will return a string that replaces any variable. No, sorry, I see what I've done there. What I wanted to use, if we were to wanting to return a loop, is not parse, but parse loop. And in theory, what should happen now is we get an illegal string offset first. I knew I shouldn't have done this. Your data will look something like this. Right. I think I know what the issue is here. However, what I'm going to do just to double check is I'm going to run dump on this. Legal string offset first. I think that is because I am not using this correctly. Let me just quickly double check that. Yeah. So what I think I've done there is I've given a great example of why you shouldn't be coding past 10 p.m. Let's have a look. If you need to iterate over content between the tags, for example, fetching records from a database or a remote API and listing them. There. Oh, sorry, I see. Right, that is if you had a set of these that were coming up in a different way. So, bad example, bad example. That's a classic example of why you shouldn't be coding at the time it is. That would be if you had something more akin to this. Let's just quickly cut that out. We'll say oak, gravel, purple. And we then turn past the loop nature, and in theory we should get this back. Go back breaking, yeah, okay. And then what we can do is we can, if we take the content from this, pop it here and just get rid of these. Let's see what happens. Yeah, okay. So what we can do here is I'm going to change this to a UL. So that's an example of a modifier, the ability to output this as a unordered list, and there we go. So the common roofing on maple, path is predominantly dirt, and you can see here on the second one is oak, predominantly gravel, and the colour of the sky will typically be purple. So sorry, I got completely confused then. I was trying to do something completely different. What that basically gives you is the ability to loop over certain information. So say you have a weather API and you are getting a list of weather for 3 or 4 different locations. You might make an API request that returns all those in an array with nested associative arrays. You can basically just loop through it that way, and it will parse that. So that is an example of how the tag pairs work. Invariably, it entirely depends on what you're doing. Whether you use a single tag or whether you use a tag pair. One of the things I would say is that you will typically, when you start out, probably use single tags. As you start getting more and more into it, whether you're looking at using a weather API or whether you're using something else, that's when you're going to start getting into the territory of using tag pairs. So what I'm going to do is I will look at chucking this up on GitHub. So if anybody who's interested in looking at this, they can. I will put a link in the video description to that particular, probably be a gist rather than a repo. But yeah, if you've got any questions or anything, let us know in the comments below. I will get back to you as soon as I can. And then probably next we'll be looking at modifiers, and then as time goes on, I'm going to look at looping back through tags and using a real world example. So We might look at how to use it for Google Analytics, and we might look at using the Open Weather API to basically do some really simple examples of how to use the tag beds. So until then, have a good evening, and I'll speak to you all soon. All right, bye.